About 10 photographers from the Dunedin Photographic Society have been gathering remotely via Zoom every Thursday since the first COVID-19 lockdown prevented them from meeting. And they've been helping each other learn Affinity photo software for processing images, but more importantly, supporting and critiquing each other and their photography in general. We'd go out sometimes for collaborative efforts, particularly because of our wish now to celebrate what we've done and our skills and our teamwork.
I guess finding that it's a group that's quite eclectic in terms of its photographic styles. There's huge variety, everything from really abstract work, which is probably where we are playing much more, through to representational and documentary. But I think the thing that I've enjoyed about it is that people are quite happy to talk about their work, they're quite happy to receive feedback even. And so that's worked really, really well for us, or for me anyway.
As a cub photographer, I started way back, and I'm one of the latest members to join. And I found them incredibly tolerant and patient as I've tried to learn all the intricacies of post-processing of images, but also the fiendish, all those buttons and settings on the camera itself and how you...
Photography has been part of my life from when I was tiny. My dad was a keen photographer. He was an artist and a photographer, and I got the enviable job of carrying his little camera case for him. I felt very important, and I was his model. So I suppose I started then, but I never actually pushed the shutter or had a camera of my own. And then when I met Howard, he had a camera, and we used to go out and he'd take lots of pictures, and it fascinated me. It was like this sort of black art, you know. And there were these amazing photos, and I didn't know how he'd done it, but it all seemed too complicated. So I was happy to just do what he said, which was stand there, press the button, and don't fiddle with anything. And then when we came to New Zealand, it was like we got into sensory overload, because everything was so different, everything was so beautiful. And I was going, why don't you take a picture of that? And I think he got a bit fed up of me keep saying, why don't you? And then he went digital, and then he very kindly bought me a digital camera for my birthday.
I've always been interested in photography, or probably more importantly, the outdoors. And it's the outdoors that really encouraged me to get into photography, because I love the outdoors. I always have, ever since I was a kid. And it's that observing nature, observing the scenery around me, that made me want to record it.
I just like imagery, I like photographs. I think it's an interesting way of telling your story without putting it in words. And I just like the abilities and options that there are now to do more with photography. Like, there's more than just the image on its own. There's a lot to do with manipulation, software, techniques, and I do sort of enjoy the technical side of it. I'm not quite a computer geek, but I do like exploring what can be done. It's sort of quite fascinating, and it's growing all the time. It started out probably at school. When I was at school, we had the set subjects you could choose from to do each half year, and one of them was photography, obviously doing it the old style way with the film, exposing your own film and creating your own images in a dark room. I quite enjoyed it. It was something that I felt was more sort of tailored towards a little bit of my artistic side. And I just learnt it from there. And when school finished, it was like I didn't have my own dark room. I didn't have anything like that to sort of continue on with. And digital photography obviously took off a few years later after that. So I just kept going with it. And when the opportunity came to join a photographic group down here in Dunedin, when I moved here, I just joined that. And from then on, it's just sort of grown.
Well, from a very early age, my father was an active amateur photographer, and I think I had my first camera, a box Brownie, when I was about 8 years old. And then I won a Kodak Instamatic camera in a Weet-Bix competition when I was 9 years old. And by the time I was a teenager, I had a Canon camera, and I was developing my own film and processing with an enlarger through my teenage years. And at university in the mid-70s, I joined the Massey University Photography Club. And then as a parent, it became important to record the children's childhoods and growing up and family holidays. And in the last 20 years here in Dunedin, I've become more involved with more artistic forms of photography and getting into abstract photography, and Affinity has helped a lot with that.
I took up photography more seriously after my partner died. In the months following, I felt that I needed a hobby that was going to get me out of the house, because I had retired also. And my previous life was as a dancer and a dance teacher. And photography has a lot of, I think, some commonality with dance, in that it's obviously about the visual image, and dance is the same. I enjoyed the creativity that's involved with photography. Because I'm a dance person, I thought I want to learn how to photograph dancers in action. But funnily enough, that doesn't necessarily become a part of my recent photography. I'm still learning the techniques.
My dad gave me a box brownie to go to Wellington. That's how I got, and I was, what, 12 at that stage? And I literally wore that box brownie out. Literally. The holes were appearing in it. Yeah, and that was the start of my photography. I always want to record what I see. And because my son introduced me to rodeo and four-wheel drive and mud plugs and all that sort of thing, I like to capture the action of what's going on around me. I like the speed and having to move to get the right shot, or doing car rallies, you've got to be in the right place at the right time when the car comes round, you know, all this sort of thing.
My dad was really into photography, and I loved watching the slides. We'd have family evenings and he'd show his slides, and I loved them, absolutely loved them. And the third thing that I bought when I left school was a little camera, and I took lessons from a local camera shop owner on how to use that, and it just grew. I met my husband, or husband-to-be, and he was a member of the territorial forces in the army. So he was away most weekends, and I took up photography more seriously so that I had something to do in the weekend while he was away. And it just grew from there, and it grew into a career. I had my own business for 13 years. I had to close that for health reasons 23 years ago, and I've just been an amateur photographer ever since, and loved it.
I remember taking a camera on my fourth form tramping camp thing when I was at high school. And I remember taking pictures of a lot of things, mainly, you know, other kids at school, but lots of plants as well. But when I went to Teachers College, one of the options was to do photography, darkroom setup, and I did that. And I've probably had a camera of my own ever since then.
Probably wasn't till the kids started playing sport that I bought a digital camera. Wanted to capture them at speed, and whatever they were doing, they played lots of sports. Didn't have a clue what I was doing with it, had all these buttons. So I took myself off to a Polytech course, and I knew Ross from work, and he said, why don't you come along to the camera club? Probably how it's come about, really. I think I really enjoy the process of seeing what comes out of my camera at the end of the day. Yeah.
I think as photographers we're able to capture moments that many people would not otherwise see, and therefore it brings me great pleasure to be able to present an aspect of bird life or bird behaviour or a natural scene or a landscape with beautiful light for people who would not otherwise be able to experience that beauty.
I just sort of intuitively fell into it. I mean, I had a point and shoot cameras earlier on, and but was never a good photographer, and I don't understand why intuitively I reached for a camera in my retirement. I know I wanted something quite different. I suppose that there is a technical challenge that I find intriguing as well, but I was longing for a more creative outlet. Through photography, I'm deprogramming a almost 40-year career as a scientist. Scientists, they really like numbers, they like certainty and repeatability, and often our quest for an idea or to test an idea has a very linear process. You kind of start and you work through a regimented series of tests of that idea. I wouldn't say science is not creative. I actually think it's beautifully creative and it requires a lot of imagination. I long for something in my retirement to just try something completely different. Learning to play again, this time creating an image.
I certainly don't plan like some people plan where, you know, so sunset is at such and such a time, and if I go to this place and the sun's going to be right in the right spot and I can do it. My brain's not wired that way. I will go out and I'll see something and think, yes, I like that. I couldn't actually define what it is that makes me go, yes, it is.
What I think I like about photography most of all is the practice of it. It's something I can lose myself in, if you like, but be focused as well. So it's a very mindful practice. I just walk around looking for things that take my eye. So things that I think people would walk past and not notice. So there might be details in, they can be details in a building. It won't be the whole building, it might be paintwork, or at the moment one of the things I'm looking for is where things have been but then have been taken away and you see the remains of what was there. I think I spend a lot more time taking photos and being in that space of taking photos than I do processing them or doing more with them.
Because I began a bit more of a broader approach to photography, I do feel that I have more ideas of what I can try and take a photograph of. It might be something that I find immediately interesting, or that I think that it might be create an interesting exercise to use affinity with. But in terms of what makes something interesting, quite often it's the shape of something, or whether or not it's in an interesting lighting situation. Otherwise, it is about the shape, the form, the light, combination of lines, corners. It could be the design aspect of something at that time. If it's not a movement-oriented thing, it's the design element of that thing, or something unusual.
What I discovered in photography by moving more towards the abstract end was the ability to use, I guess, pixels to paint with, pixels to create textures with, pixels to create shapes with, and in there I can play and create and make. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about over the last 3 years, I've always liked doing landscape. I've liked taking images of people in their environment, and that's often what I do if I'm travelling, is I'm interested in people in their environment. But I've gone right away from people photography. I have some ethical issues with that. I think that's just me. But I've been thinking a lot more about what is it that I like about the landscape, and why am I taking landscape images? Well, it's not actually the landscape. What I love is the land and being in the land and getting my feet on the ground. But I actually like shape and contour and the way in which landforms play out. And that's really been an insight that's come to me in the last 3 to 4 years. And some of that has come because I've discovered artists like Conor McCann, and more recently Robin Wright's work down here in the Otago Peninsula, or Lisa Glynn's work, where what they've accentuated in their painting is landforms and the shape of the lands and the way shade and texture work. And so that's probably what I'm much more about, is actually what is it in the environment that speaks to me and how do I want to portray that?
I think a good photograph for me is probably something I like. And that's a difficult thing, I think, when you're part of a club and entering competitions, or which I haven't done too much of, but you're maybe thinking what would be a good photo for others to look at. And I don't enjoy that so much. A good photo for me might be something that gives me a feeling, or the atmosphere of wherever I am, because then I'm a wee bit of a contradiction, because I might like a photo that's a blurry photo or out of focus, but then I also like sharp photos where people have perhaps got really good technical skills, which I'm still working on. Sometimes I'll plan to go out and do something, but most times it's, oh gosh, look at that beautiful sunrise, let's take a photo. How can I make that look good? Or how can I make that look how I'm feeling? So I love intentional camera movement for a sunrise. I think that's something about the feeling of it at the time. More often than not, I'm just carrying my camera handheld and it's opportunist as opposed to planned.
My business was in taking wedding and portraits, so now I prefer not to do that. So what really interests me now is landscape. I'm not a great landscape photographer. I used to love working in the darkroom, and digital photography allows me that freedom to still be a darkroom worker as well as a photographer. My first love is probably in the darkroom. I get more satisfaction now for just going out looking for photos. Also, saying that, I do plan in advance before I leave home a genre or style of photo that I want to pursue. I find if I do that, then my overall photography of the day is much better than if I just go out and say, oh, I want to take photos today, let's see what I can find. When I'm taking it in the camera, I plan. When I'm doing it in Affinity, I experiment.
I've always had a camera in my hand. Any family photos you see of me, everybody else has got a glass of wine or a beer, I've got a camera. I'm the one that's always taken photos of people or of things that we've done, or if you've got something new, I've always been the one that's taken the photograph. I take photos that give me pleasure because I do surf lifesaving. I'm an ex-surf lifesaver, so I take competition stuff. I take stuff down at the beach all the time. I'll go to the mountains with Frankie. My horizons are broadening since joining this group. I've learnt how to do macro, which I've never done in my life before, or still life, or portrait. I'm an outdoor person. I like doing things that involve movement.
The photographs that I take are the types of images that I love, and that's landscapes, sometimes people, mostly animals or wildlife, plants, things like fungi, the bush, water, all sorts of things that please me. And what makes them good is one of those things that is hard to define. To me, it's got to be technically good. I'm into representing what I see as what I see rather than an impression of what I see. So to me, it's got to be faithful. Even if I'm introducing a new sky or something, it's got to look as though it's natural, and it's got to look as though it's supposed to be there. It's got to be sharp, it's got to be clear. With landscape photography, the reason I think it's so hard is you've got to get all of the elements just right. You've got to have a really appealing subject. You've got to have great light. You've got to be in the right spot for it all to work. Part of the reason that I like landscape photography is that it shows the wide open spaces, a bit like the Graham Sidney paintings that you see. I like to not really replicate his style, but that's the type of scene that I really quite like. Loving nature, not just an area, but loving nature generally, I think is a really good attribute to have when it comes to getting good photographs.
When I look back on 40 years of a science career, I think, well, I've tabled lots and lots of numbers and evidence about the ways we could be more sustainable. I wonder whether they made a blind bit of difference, because what is needed for transformation is more of a social and personal and an emotional response. We've known how to live sustainably for hundreds of years, but we just don't seem to be able to do it. So I wondered whether photography was an entry point of bringing some of those issues to New Zealand society and to our local community, and starting a spark of awareness, which in the end might lead to behavioural change and transformation. Now I just want to create images which would mean totally different things to different people, and as long as they are exciting me, that's the sort of first step and my kind of guiding principle. If I like it, and if it's an image of something that I find intriguing, that's enough. It doesn't have to be representational. It doesn't have to be particularly in focus, as you might notice in some of my photographs. But most of all, what I hope it does is starts to engage their brain as well as their feelings.
When I originally left school, I went into music. I trained as a classical musician, played the clarinet, oboe, saxophone, flute, cello very badly, piano very badly. So music for me, from being really quite young, has been a big part of my life. But what I didn't realise at that time, and have since realised with the photography, is there's always music playing in my head. I think it has a fancy name, which is synesthesia. And I don't know what triggers it. It is there when I get up. And the only time it's not there is if I'm not in a good place, and then there's nothing. But other than that, there is music. It's not like an earworm, it is a piece of music which then seems to influence the images I make. I'm not desperately into photorealism. I enjoy the more impressionistic and abstract side of photography. So it's more looking at the artistic rather than the photorealistic. A large part of it is, I suppose, I'm a bit of a techno geek, and I love working out how things work, and I love making things work, and I have to make them work as best as I possibly can. And if it gets difficult, I don't want to give up. So I will try and keep going until I make it work. And once I make it work, then it's like, okay, I can do that now. I think with post-processing, people either love it or hate it. I don't know that there's a middle ground, and a lot of people will go, oh, well, you know, this is virtually straight out of camera. All I did was change these little bits. I can't do that. In fact, if I get an image that I do that on, I feel sort of cheated because I can't play.
For me, it's being able to tweak something that I already like, or that I think could enhance an idea I've got in my head, or an idea I didn't have in my head that then produces. I don't know, it's an interesting process of playing, experimenting, and I guess I'm not somebody who could go and paint a picture. I really admire people that can do that, but photography, I can achieve something that I like and enjoy the process of going out to take the photo. I think that's a huge thing for me. That's a big part of the process. The software package is not the big part of it. It's like an add-on.
Well, I'm interested in artificial intelligence In terms of artificial intelligence imagery, it's interesting to me now that there are programs which will generate images from words. Also, I can use my own photographs as prompts, so I can enter my own photograph to beautify it or to enhance it in some way.
Different things appeal to different people. For me, in the long term, more abstract things appeal. Even though I do lots of more technical wildlife photos, I really look to the challenge of trying to be a bit more creative.
I don't get hung up on all the camera talk and all the camera technical stuff. I want a camera that does what I want to do. I know all the technical stuff in terms of enough to be able to do what I want to do. I only have one lens, that's all I use, because what's more important to me is not the technical aspect of creating an image, but the emotional aspect of what I want to say, and then being able to use the camera almost as my brushes. So it's quite a different approach to photography. And that's why I sit a little loose around the whole notion of photography, because it tends to suggest, tripods and f-stops and exposures and all that technical side, which I don't get excited about. But I need to know it to be able to create what I do. I think one of the American photographers historically who's influenced me a lot in the way I think about photography is Paul Strand. And Paul Strand had a quote which is, "It's important in our photography to say something about the world." Now some will say that through conveying beauty. Some will convey it through macro images, but they're saying something about the world. And I wanted to say something about the world that I was experiencing and some of the issues that we're facing around sustainability, but equally issues around social justice. And so how can I do that? Well, if I just leave them simply locked up as pixels in my hard drive, it's not saying much. It only says something to me when I have a look at it. But I also don't necessarily want to go down the track of producing art prints. There's a lot of that stuff out there, and I've only got so much space on my wall. And it's a beautiful thing to think about, that how do we take that image that we've created and taken and give it back to the world from which it came? Well, we need to do it in physical ways. And so, yeah, prints, but for me, more importantly, it's making books. And so what we've both started doing is making handmade books. And I'm very clear they're not homemade, they're handmade. And there'll be imperfections with them, but those imperfections are a part of the handmade product. Whether they're screw posts, whether they're concertina books. And more recently, I've actually been making fold-out cards that you can just put together and put into an envelope and give it to someone as a gift. And that's again part of that philosophy of giving back and making it accessible to people in ways that they can use, not just hang on a wall.
I feel helps the most in developing style is to be reflective, to look at other photographers' work and look at your own, and yeah, just think about how things can be changed, what could improve it. It's good to get an opinion from someone else. That's a really positive thing about focus groups and the peer support thing of any group, getting other people's opinions, even if you don't like them.
What we actually have is we have this incredibly supportive environment where we can ask questions without fear of anybody thinking we're stupid, and where we can build up our knowledge, because each of us will be able to bring something different to that group.
It's proved to be a really good group to be a part of, and the skills that I've learnt, not just with using Affinity, but I've learnt with the other groups posting their photographs, have really helped me in actually photo taking.
It's a way of seeing. So we can enrich each other's lives through the sharing of our photographs.
I think there's another thing about photography which I kind of underestimated, and I actually think it's a kind of mind, body, heart kind of triangle that, yeah, you have to be technically clever, you have to be really feeling quite peaceful and complete by both a body and mind and heart connectivity.